You referenced LIBOR, we all have. Tell us why LIBOR and the setting of LIBOR rates is so important, not only to the American people, but to the world financial, and what it does, and approximately how many billions of loans are involved in, billions of dollars involved in that.
As I said, LIBOR is set in 10 currencies, not just the dollar or the pound sterling, 15 different maturities. It has implications around the world, in part because there are a variety of financial contracts. Mortgages is one example in the United States, but around the world that reference that rate. So it's important for that reason. But it's also important, of course, because we've seen a devastating loss of trust in the basic of trust and confidence in the integrity of the financial system. So when you see a system vulnerable to banks misreporting, that can have more damage to the basic confidence people have about how the system works than any of the direct finance implications of the rate itself. But that's why it's consequential.
But historically, a lot of banking has been based on trust, has it not? Integrity. So when people realize that some people were perhaps manipulating the LIBOR rate or manipulating this and that or fraud here and there, it hurts the whole financial system. It hurts us all, does it not?
I agree with that. As I said, I agree with that completely.
Mr. Secretary, going back to when you first learned about possible manipulation of LIBOR, was that in 2008, early 2008, I believe you said?
Yeah, that's my judgment
Okay.
looking back at that time, which is again, it was these reports in the market and in the press and concerns started to come when the rate started to go up as the financial crisis intensified.
Who did you notify besides Merv King, who was chairman of the Bank of England, about your concerns and others' concerns about the manipulation of the rate?
Well, as I said, I briefed what was then called the President's Working Group on Financial Markets, which means that body includes the Secretary of the Treasury,
Okay.
Chairman of the Fed, Chairman of the SEC, Chairman of the CFTC, has other officials too. And then my staff briefed the Treasury and the SEC and the CFTC after that. And that was important because although it was clear that the reforms to this problem were going to have to come in London,
Sure.
This had implications for us.
But we had banks that fed into that rate, did we not?
Well, at that point, 16 banks were part of the sample.
Okay.
3 of those banks were American banks.
Okay. Do you know, did you follow up after notifying the working group you talked about in the Bank of America? Did you notify the Attorney General of the United States, the Justice Department?
We are, the New York Fed, my former colleagues, are carefully looking through all the records of whom the New York Fed staff informed at that point.
Did you, sir, as president of the bank, did you personally inform?
No, I did.
Someone on your staff to let the Justice Department know about the implications of probably manipulation of the rate?
To the best of my knowledge, what I did was to inform the President's Working Group and those regulatory bodies. And the reason I did that is because those are the bodies which have a range of different authorities that relate to market manipulation and abuse. And so that was a very important and necessary thing to do.
Did you think when you first learned of possible manipulation of the rate, did you think this was a big deal? Or a trivial thing? Or
I absolutely thought this was a problem, which is why I took the initiative to do the things we did. Again, the problem was you had a rate in London overseen by the British Bankers Association where banks were asked to provide an estimate of what they might pay to borrow, and then there was an estimate that was averaged over time. And that itself created this vulnerability to misreporting. So it was for that reason that we were concerned about the problem in this context, which is why we took the actions we did to brief the broader regulatory community here in the United States and to encourage the British to fix it, to reform it.
Going back to the Justice Department, do you have any knowledge yourself of when the Justice Department got involved in this? Was it late? Was it recently? Or was it after the British hearings and regulators were involved, or what? Do you have?
I don't. That's something you have to ask them in the enforcement agencies. My recollection from what other people have testified is that the CFTC's investigation, which they started about the same time, April of 2008, ultimately came to include the SEC and Justice, as well as a mix of regulators in London and elsewhere.
Does the Federal Reserve Bank of New York have the authority to oversee misconduct by banks that would be under your jurisdiction?
The Congress has given the Federal Reserve, in this case the Board of Governors, a range of different enforcement powers. Those powers are given to the Federal Reserve as a whole, and the Reserve banks, like the Federal Reserve Bank of New York, do play an active role in enforcement cases, working with the Board of Governors when they implicate our direct authorities.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Senator